Liberal law professor warns Dems are clamoring for China-style censorship. The coronavirus pandemic has unleashed the inner fascist in liberals who see the crisis as a golden opportunity to silence their political adversaries for good. With Democrat governors in large blue states determined to keep their citizens locked down indefinitely, cultivate armies of snitches, unleash the police and most of all, crush dissent, the nation is heading in a dangerous direction. For those who aren't too blind to see or too cowed by fear to care, the states ruled by the likes of Whitmer, Cuomo and Newsom are beginning to resemble China, the source of the virus and their model for how to govern. The calls for censorship have alarmed liberal law professor Jonathan Turley, who warns that the insatiable appetite for severely limiting free speech has been enabled by the current state of mass hysteria. According to Professor Turley, censorship works in a country much like the coronavirus. Initially, you feel better from silencing those views that you consider lies. Then comes the crash as others demand more and more censorship, including views that you consider to be true. That is what has happened in Europe, where an expanding range of speech is being criminalized or censored. Without uncensored speech, the political system is left gasping for air. Via the Hill, the dangerous liberal ideas for censorship in the United States. Almost everywhere you turn today, politicians are telling the public to get used to the new normal after the pandemic. For some people, this means public health precautions from social distancing to banning handshakes. Others have quickly added long-standing dreams for everything from the guaranteed basic income advocated by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which was also recently raised by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, to mailed voting elections advocated by many Democrats. The most chilling suggestion, however, comes from the politicians and academics who have called for the censorship of social media and the Internet. The only thing spreading faster than the coronavirus has been censorship and the loud calls for more restrictions on free speech. The Atlantic recently published an article by Harvard Law School professor Jack Goldsmith and University of Arizona law professor Andrew Keen Woods calling for Chinese-style censorship of the Internet. They declared that, in the great debate of the past 2 decades about freedom versus control of the network, China was largely right and the United States was largely wrong, as significant monitoring and speech control are inevitable components of a mature and flourishing Internet, and governments must play a large role in such practices to ensure that the Internet is compatible with society norms and values. Professor Turley was referencing a chilling article published by The Atlantic, which has become the house organ of America's liberal intelligentsia, whose philosophy aligns with Beijing and classic totalitarian regimes in Germany and the old Soviet Union. Co-written by yet another Harvard elitist, the premise is, in the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct, and the US was wrong. Via The Atlantic, Internet speech will never go back to normal. As surprising as it may sound, digital surveillance and speech control in the United States already show many similarities to what one finds in authoritarian states such as China. Constitutional and cultural differences mean that the private sector, rather than the federal and state governments, currently takes the lead in these practices, which further values and address threats different from those in China. But the trend toward greater surveillance and speech control here, and toward the growing involvement of government, is undeniable and likely inexorable. In the great debate of the past 2 decades about freedom versus control of the network, China was largely right and the United States was largely wrong. Significant monitoring and speech control are inevitable components of a mature and flourishing Internet, and governments must play a large role in these practices to ensure that the Internet is compatible with a society's norms and values. This is truly the way that these people think, and they are only one election away from total control of the political system. Turley also specifically singled out embittered sore loser Hillary Clinton, who has threatened Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who she said should pay a price for what he is doing to our democracy by not moving quickly enough to censor conservatives. Corrupt House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff also caught Turley's attention for his recent demand that Silicon Valley tech giants Facebook, Twitter, Google and YouTube, all of which are in China's hip pocket, use the coronavirus to censor misinformation and false information. It isn't only the censorship that is a domestic version of communist China, the push for coronavirus testing and tracking via cell phone apps are ripe for abuse. Could Chinese-style social credit scoring be far behind? Americans need to break free of the fear of infection to mobilize against something that is far worse and is spreading more quickly than the virus itself before it is too late.